Call the committee to order. I first want to thank our witnesses for taking time out of their busy schedules to come before this committee. I realize you all left what you do every day to come here. So I hope it's as pleasant as we think it should be. But again, I will just defer. We just came out of Thanksgiving, which is a great, great holiday, and she brings family together. Then we're going into Christmas, which is a great holiday also. So if we can keep that in mind, this is a great month, Thanksgiving to Christmas, and then we'll go into a new year and hope that it gets even better than the last year was. So thank you all for being here. We really look forward to your testimony. In 2017, President Trump, Congress, and specifically Republican members of Ways and Means Committee passed the greatest tax reform seen in decades. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act made this nation the best place in the world to build, to invest in, and to create jobs. We ended the unstoppable trend of American companies shipping their money, jobs, and headquarters to foreign countries. In fact, and Mr. Hearn is very much aware, that we had zero inversions after Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Now, 8 years later, as these pro-growth, pro-American tax policies were set to expire, Ways and Means Republicans came together to strengthen and make permanent our work in 2017. It took some late nights and countless hours of work, but on July 4th, 2025, President Trump signed his signature Working Families Tax Cuts Act into law. This new bill grew Americans' tax base, promoted long-term domestic investment, and secured good jobs for Americans far into the future. Now, ultimately, the Working Families Tax Cuts protects and creates over 7 million American jobs. While Republicans were working to strengthen our international tax policy, Democrats worked to undermine American businesses and taxpayers by entering us into Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, also known as OECD, and we are just fascinated with acronyms. I wish we could speak in real language. They say Army and manuals are written at a 6th grade level, and that's so people can actually understand them. So there's no saying, if you can't convince them, confuse them. I am absolutely astounded by the alphabet soup that we have to look at every time we look at something, and then codes that go with it. So we're trying to stay away from that as much as we can. Now, according to analysis by the Joint Committee on Taxation, the United States was slated to lose over $120 billion in tax revenue over 10 years under the global minimum tax. President Biden and Secretary Yellen bypassed Congress on these negotiations because they knew just how bad these deals would diminish the economic security of our country. Now, thankfully, on his first day in office, President Trump immediately reversed these American last policies. Over the last year, Secretary Bessent and Treasury Department have worked tirelessly to secure a strong international tax deal for the American taxpayer. I thank President Trump, Secretary Bessent, and the administration for their great work, and I urge our European countries to come to the table. We will not go quietly into that dark night. We will work endlessly to provide a fair playing field for our country. It is, after all, America first. I now yield to Ranking Member Thompson for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of the witnesses for being here, and a very special welcome to Chairman Brady. It's always great to have a former committee member come back, and I've got to say, you look relaxed, you look younger, and you look wealthier. You know, if our Republican colleagues really wanted to seriously discuss global competitiveness, then we'd be talking about the elephant in the room, the Trump administration's reckless and chaotic tariffs. These are crushing small businesses and our farming community and our farmers. Once again, the Ways and Means Committee is fiddling while Rome is burning. Our committee, the House Committee with jurisdiction over tariffs, has sat idly by and done absolutely nothing while the Trump administration has imposed the largest tax in history on the American people. And we've actually surrendered our authority on tariffs to the administration, and that's just wrong. We should be working overtime to take that authority back. Global Competitiveness for American Workers and Businesses, the title of this hearing. Tell that to the Advanced Pressure Technology, a 33-year Napa manufacturer in my district that supplies parts to tech and semiconductor firms. Just this Monday, AP Tech permanently closed its Napa plant and laid off 237 workers in a community with a population of 79,000 people, because the business has a significant consumer base outside of the United States, and they simply could not weather this administration's chaotic global trade policy. And I'd like to submit for the record, without objection, Mr. Chairman, the article in the newspaper that addresses this. In fact, the Trump tariffs have been an outright failure nationwide. As Professor Clausing stated in her written testimony, these tariffs amount to a $1,700 tax on each and every household in the United States of America. They've harmed U.S. business competitiveness, and again, as the professor testified, have actually cost the United States manufacturing jobs. But no sector has been harder by these reckless tariffs than our farmers. They've been devastated by this trade war. U.S. agricultural exports to China fell by more than 50% at the height of the trade retaliation. Soybeans exports collapsed so severely that prices dropped to decade-long lows, with prices falling some 34% from prices in 2021. Dairy products have faced declining market access, and pork producers lost major overseas buyers. Nearly 8,000 farms shut down nationwide during the early phase of the trade war. These aren't abstract numbers. These reflect a major harm that's been imposed on our constituents. These tariffs slammed the door on foreign markets that took decades to build. Farmers cannot simply wait out a trade war. Once a foreign buyer shifts to another country, to Brazil or to Europe, those markets don't come back easy. This committee should work together to take back our tariff authority and develop a sensible, consistent trade policy rather than letting the administration run roughshod over the United States Congress. I'm sure many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are hoping that the Supreme Court does their job for them, and maybe they will. But that doesn't change the fact that struggling businesses, struggling farmers, and everyday Americans who are struggling to keep up with ever-rising prices are asking Congress for help, and Republicans continue to turn a deaf ear to their pleas. I would hope that we could agree that affordability is a major issue impacting all of our constituents, and the best place to start to address this is in the tariff space. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I'm now going to introduce our witnesses first. Kevin Brady, who is the 66th chairman of the House Committee of Ways and Means and the author of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017. It's great to have you back, sir. Agnes Webb is Vice President of Tax at Silvamo. Brent Wells is the John Mixon Chair and Professor of Law at the University of Houston Law Center. Kimberly A. Clausing is Eric M. Zolt Chair in Tax Law and Policy at UCLA School of Law. Thank you all for joining us today. I know you take a day out of your lives to come and do this. We really appreciate it. I am going to encourage all members to stay here until you finish your testimony and they finish their question. I think it's only courteous if we ask you to come in for a full day, that we should probably stay for the whole time you're here. So that's just a personal request of my own. We'll see how many people follow that. So thank you for joining us today. Your written statements will be made part of the hearing record, and you each have 5 minutes to deliver your oral remarks. Mr. Brady, please start.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Thompson, distinguished members of the Tax Subcommittee. It's an honor to be here today. It's an even bigger honor to have served with many of you on the committee. I know firsthand the important constitutional role this committee plays, and the many times we've worked together on bipartisan issues of importance to the country. The achievement of this committee in not just making permanent the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but improving it and making it better is crucial to America's economic future. If you recall, we undertook tax reform in 2017 because we had to. At the time, the U.S. was burdened with the highest corporate rate in the world, an uncompetitive international tax code. It was a relic of the Kennedy administration. As a result, for a decade before tax reform, our economy in the U.S. was abnormally slow. Paychecks were flat for a decade. And almost every other month, another U.S. company was being bought and moved overseas, oftentimes with the manufacturing, the research, and investment that goes with it, all because of an uncompetitive tax code. At the time we were told this was the new normal, the best America could do. But we knew this country deserved better. So through policy work over 8 years and more than 40 congressional hearings, the House Ways and Means Committee sought to create a tax code built for growth, built for the growth of jobs, paychecks, and the U.S. economy. We set out to leapfrog America to the most competitive economy on the planet, to become the premium destination in the world for investment and innovation, to ensure that America's businesses could compete and win anywhere in the world, especially here at home, and when they did, to bring those profits back here to invest here in America. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which many of you worked on, led and signed by President Trump, achieved those goals and remains a boon for America's workers today. And if you recall, in the first most important step, we lowered the corporate rate to 21% from 35%. We replaced the outdated worldwide system of taxation with the territorial one. We pioneered the creation of the first global minimum tax. We established safeguards against exporting business income to low-tax states and importing deductions to domestic returns. And we created crucial investments, incentives to spur U.S. investment innovation here at home. As you noted, after that, zero inversions from the day it was signed. But those benefits to American workers and families were at risk if Congress didn't act, if you didn't act in 2025 to make those tax reforms permanent. So Republicans in Congress beat all expectations by quickly delivering to the president tax policy that locked in the pro-growth provisions of the TCJA, fully restored incentives for innovation and competitiveness investment in America, and made real, thoughtful improvements in international taxes to ensure American businesses can continue to compete and win in the global marketplace. Both for the short and long term, the Working Families Tax Cut is already proving to be a success, especially in the international tax area. It's spurring investment, keeping jobs in the United States, and positioning America to lead in innovation and exports for decades to come. The bill ensures America continues to be the best place in the world to build and invest. The immediate expensing for R&D is driving the hiring of staff, research staff within the U.S. rather than abroad. The new deduction for manufacturing structures is already showing benefits for reshoring supply chains. Companies selling made-in-America goods and services around the world are discovering new reasons to expand here at home because of the changes you made with GILTI, BEAT, and FDII. Modifying the FDII expense allocation rules, make sure we can keep valuable IP here and expanding U.S. operations. In other changes that you made, you create incentives so that our business is now encouraged to make the U.S. their global hub for developing and owning their IP. Modifying the expense allocation rules for GILTI, make sure we don't have double taxation. We don't damage the competitive position of U.S. companies, making it harder for them to grow jobs here at home. And the reforms you made are crucial in how you overhauled export-related income. You've created a powerful incentive to locate production, intellectual property, and profits here in the United States, and as a result, the One Big Beautiful Bill will make the U.S. the most competitive in artificial intelligence and lead in this area. In closing, I would say these are signals and signs that should be embraced by members of both parties. Is there more that can be done by Congress in the Trump administration to make American businesses more competitive and drive investment with the U.S.? Absolutely, starting with the work you were doing at the OECD, and there are a number of other next steps this committee can consider to build even more on the intent of you in Congress in this new tax bill. And Mr. Chairman, I would ask my written testimony be reflected in the written record.
It will be. Thank you so much.
Sir.
Good to see you again, sir. Professor Wells, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Brett Wells. I'm a professor of law at the University of Houston Law Center. And I want to thank the committee for inviting me to testify at today's hearing. And I also ask that my full written testimony be included in the record. Let me begin by stating that in 2017 and 2025, Congress enacted several notable international tax reform measures, and this committee is to be commended for its role in making that happen. Even though important progress has been made, more can and should be done. First, I want to address inbound international taxation. In order to preserve competitive neutrality and raise much-needed revenue, Congress must ensure that business profits earned within the United States are subjected to a comparable amount of taxation, regardless of whether the U.S. situs business is owned by a U.S. person or a foreign person. To accomplish this goal, the United States must build on its recent reform efforts and address related party earnings stripping transactions. Historically, the United States had failed to meaningfully restrict inbound earnings stripping opportunities, and the historic failure created a competitive advantage for foreign-based corporations in the ownership of U.S. situs businesses. Corporate inversions were a visible manifestation of the larger inbound earnings stripping cancer. The corporate inversion phenomenon represented an effort by U.S.-based multinational corporations to become a foreign-based multinational corporation exactly because it coveted the inbound earnings stripping opportunities available to foreign-based multinational corporations. Congress was thus right to enact reforms, and the reform of Section 163J, coupled with Congress's enactment of Section 59 Cap A, represent the most comprehensive congressional effort to address inbound earnings stripping in decades, perhaps ever. These were needed reforms. Even though Congress took important steps to address the systemic inbound earnings stripping challenges, more can and should be done. In my written testimony, I've included 5 amendments that should be made to Section 59 Cap A so that it can more effectively fulfill its base protection goals and better level the playing field among foreign-based and U.S.-based multinational corporations. Second, I want to address outbound international taxation. In 2017, Congress enacted Section 951 Cap A as a global minimum tax. And in 2025, Congress enacted further technical corrections to make it a more effective global minimum tax. For the reasons further articulated in my written testimony, I believe that Section 951 Cap A is a much more effective global minimum tax in comparison to the OECD's Pillar 2 acronym framework. Thus, Congress was right to enact Section 951 Cap A, and Congress was right to reject the invitation to adopt Pillar 2. However, now that the global minimum tax of Section 951 Cap A is in place, this is an opportune moment for you to consider further reforms to U.S. outbound international taxation. The first needed outbound reform measure that should be considered is legislation that would address CFC inbound tax planning. Under current law, a controlled foreign corporation of a U.S. multinational corporation can sell goods into the United States economy or provide services to U.S. customers from offshore and achieve a lower tax rate than would occur if these goods or services were routed through domestic corporations. This is an inappropriate tax loophole that should be closed. It should not be the case that a U.S. multinational can achieve a lower tax rate on the sale of goods or the provision of services to U.S. customers via offshore affiliates than would be possible if those activities were conducted through domestic corporations. This loophole promotes offshoring of U.S. business activities. In my written testimony, I proposed 2 reforms to the U.S. Subpart F regime that should be enacted to foreclose the CFC inbound tax loophole. Further, in my written testimony, I provide 6 further simplification reforms that are now made possible because Section 951 Cap A has been grafted into the U.S. international tax regime. These simplification measures are now made possible due to the good work and positive reform that this committee has already enacted. Let me conclude my testimony by saying that this committee is to be commended for the work it has already done. Even so, more can and should be done. I urge this committee to further its reform efforts on inbound taxation to better level the playing field. In the outbound context, I urge this committee to address CFC inbound tax planning transactions and also to enact further simplification reforms that are now made possible as a result of the work the committee has already done. This concludes my opening statement. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Professor. Ms. Webb, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Thompson, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Agnes Webb, and I am the Vice President of Tax at Sylvamo. We are the world's paper company. Headquartered in Memphis, Sylvamo is a global leader in uncoated freesheet paper. We are proud to employ 1,800 Americans across 3 locations, supporting 5,000 additional manufacturing jobs in rural mill communities. We primarily make and sell copy paper, commercial printing paper, converting paper, and specialty paper. We have a strong portfolio of brands in the U.S., including Accent, Opaque, and Hammer Mill, and we are the exclusive global supplier for HP papers. So even in today's digital age, paper is a crucial part of Americans' everyday life. We use it to educate, to communicate, and to entertain. So when Sylvamo became an independent company in 2021, we chose to stay in Memphis. In doing so, we benefited from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which made the United States a much more hospitable business environment. The TCJA reduced the U.S. corporate tax rate to 21%, and equally important, it established a competitive international tax system, one that made it easier to make things here in America and export them around the world. Without the TCJA, Sylvamo would have faced a 35% corporate rate on every dollar we brought back to the U.S., limiting our ability to invest in our people, in our communities, and our products. It was an outdated tax code that locked companies' profits overseas and made it more costly to manufacture here in the U.S. But here's what happened instead. The TCJA helped Sylvamo tap into the location, the infrastructure, and the skilled workforce here in America, creating jobs for thousands of hardworking Americans. In other words, the TCJA, and specifically its international provisions, worked. And this year, Congress stepped up to make those provisions work for the long term. The One Big Beautiful Bill made the TCJA's pro-growth provisions permanent and stronger, solidifying the U.S. as a hub for manufacturing investment. And here's how. So first and foremost, H.R. 1 prevented devastating tax increases in our industry. GILTI, FDII, BEAT were all scheduled to become less favorable to taxpayers at the end of the year. H.R. 1 prevented these tax hikes and set up a pro-growth baseline for the tax code. The law also renewed and made permanent expired provisions that are extremely impactful for Sylvamo. Restoring immediate expensing for our R&D costs and our capital equipment purchases empowers us to invest more, to innovate more, to hire more, to grow more here in the U.S. And finally, H.R. 1 made key TCJA provisions work even better for manufacturers. In the international tax space, that meant reforming GILTI by improving how companies allocate expenses and reducing the foreign tax credit haircut. It also meant enhancing the FDII deduction to strengthen the incentive to locate intellectual property in manufacturing here in the U.S. and to export U.S. innovation around the world. And H.R. 1 did all of that while maintaining a 21% corporate rate. So with a stronger tax code here at home, Sylvamo can compete even more boldly across North America, Latin America, and Europe. That means converting more dollars earned abroad into opportunities here at home. In 2025, we were proud to announce approximately $150 million in new investments in our facilities, in our employees, and in our communities in South Carolina. When we incentivize investment in America, we're strengthening our hand on the world stage. With a permanent tax code that provides a foundation for growth, manufacturing is set up to deliver for the American people, for the American economy, and for American prosperity. And that's what Congress did with H.R. 1. That's what makes Sylvamo's story possible, and that's how we secure a true U.S. manufacturing renaissance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Witt. Professor Clausing, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Thompson, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify. Today, I will make several points that amount to one bottom line. The most direct way to promote global competitiveness for American businesses and workers is to remove the Trump administration tariffs. During the early months of this year, Americans have faced the largest tax increase in a generation. But what was unique about this tax increase was that it did not originate with Congress, who holds the power of the purse and the authority to tax, but rather it came from the Trump administration tariffs. These tariffs are a large tax increase. If they continue at today's levels, it will amount to about $1,700 each year for U.S. households. These tax increases will dwarf any OB3 tax cuts for all but the richest Americans, indeed for more than 80% of the population. Today's tariffs generate a decade-long tax increase of well over $2 trillion, the largest tax increase as a share of GDP since 1982. So far, policy changes by the Trump administration have not changed that bottom line. The grocery relief that President Trump provided a few weeks ago, while a welcome recognition of the fact that tariffs do raise prices, amounts to only $35 in tariff savings. While the U.S. government certainly needs revenue to address our large deficits and debt, tariffs are a particularly harmful way to raise that revenue for several reasons. First, tariffs are very distortionary, and the Trump tariffs have been severely detrimental to business. More than half of all U.S. imports are intermediate goods that are inputs into final products. Tariffs are often particularly high for goods like iron, steel, and copper. These tariffs on inputs raise costs for U.S. firms, whereas their competitors abroad often have tariff-free access to inputs. This means that U.S. manufacturers are losing competitiveness. Tariffs harm our export industries by moving resources toward producing goods we would ordinarily import. U.S. exporters are also losing market share due to foreign government retaliation and changes in foreign consumer sentiment due to the trade war. This has been particularly hard for U.S. farmers and U.S. manufacturers. Businesses also have to cope with persistent uncertainty about the future path of tariffs, as well as high compliance costs. Complying with this tariff regime is no picnic. One estimate suggests that the compliance costs from the 2025 tariffs are $40 to $70 billion for U.S. manufacturers alone. Second, unlike most tax increases that Americans have experienced over the past century, these tax increases are particularly regressive. They burden poor households more than rich ones for the simple reason that tariffs tax consumption, and poor households consume a much larger share of their income. Further, the Trump tariffs have been particularly harmful to U.S. workers. Manufacturing jobs have shrunk in 2025, and growth in transportation and construction is also particularly weak. Indeed, in the recent data, and for the first time since the pandemic, the United States is on net losing blue-collar jobs. Year-on-year job losses are at about 60,000. Third, tariffs are rife with opportunities for corruption, rent-seeking, and lobbying. When large, well-connected firms receive tariff exemptions, smaller, less well-connected competitors lose market share to them, and this harms competition in our economy and hurts small businesses. Finally, while there are some positive elements of the 2025 tax legislation, on net, it exacerbates the problems of the tariffs. Tariffs are a regressive tax, and the tax cuts in OB3 also increase income inequality by giving the largest tax cuts to the richest Americans. OB3 also increases deficits, thus increasing interest rates and hampering business investment. These effects are larger than any modest positive effects that we'd expect from this legislation. Finally, the legislation doubles down on a steep tilt that is already provided in the tax playing field that benefits foreign operations relative to domestic ones. That tilt continues today. These problems are significant, and Congress should remedy them. But the single most important tax agenda item for Congress is to remove the Trump administration's tariffs. This action would provide large tax cuts for every American, reverse harmful effects on investment and job creation, strengthen U.S. exports, and improve U.S. international relations, which have certainly taken a large hit in recent months. Congress has the power of the purse and the ability to end these tariffs. For good reason, the framers of the Constitution endowed Congress with the power to tax, a power that lies solely within the legislative branch. It is high time Congress retook that authority. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Professor. Now, we thank you all for being here, and your statements will be made part of the hearing record. So I'm going to be the first to go on this. Chairman, it's really good to see you. And I really remember, there's 5 of us still on this committee that were here whenever you launched this whole program back in 2017. Days and nights, weekends, whatever we had to do, we did. But the results of it were absolutely incredible. And I know, as Mr. Hearn talks about all the time, zero inversions. American companies didn't want to leave America. They just thought they couldn't be profitable anymore, so they went off-sea. We made it possible for them to come home, and they have come home. And while people complain about a lot of different things, the one thing I do know this, we reduced the rates and increased the tax revenue incredibly. So the math worked. So if you can, speak a little bit on the Working Families tax cuts and how it improves on the international tax work done in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Well, first, thank you for your leadership, Chairman Kelly, not just this go-around, which was so important, but in 2017 as well. Apparently, you were so valuable, you needed to stay around and deliver it a second time. So thank you, Coach, for that leadership.
I appreciate that, but not everybody feels that way, especially my wife.
I understand. A couple thoughts. I don't think most people realize how bad our international tax system was, how damaging it was back home. We talk about inversions, but the truth of the matter is, we are seeing, whole plants pick up and move overseas, taking research, taking their headquarters, literally leaving these communities, desolate, all because of a tax code that punished them for being here in the U.S. And then our companies, we all know, it's not enough to simply buy American. We need to sell American all throughout the world, creates great income, revenue, job growth here in the U.S. as well. But our tax code was not only making it tough for our companies and our Aggies and our manufacturers to win overseas, but when they did, they couldn't keep those dollars, they couldn't even bring those dollars home. And so the changes in the international tax code basically created the incentives in a giant sucking sound of research, intellectual property, manufacturing back in the United States. We saw investment on average for companies doing it grow 20% after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. We saw intellectual property, the revenue from companies bringing it back and keeping it here. And I remember, Chairman, being in California about a year after we passed the bill with about 25 tech companies, all of whom you would know as we went around this round table. Every one of them had a story of either bringing the intellectual property back to America and the advanced manufacturing that goes with it, or the new IP they were developing, they were keeping here in the U.S. as well. All of those benefits had a huge role in allowing companies to do more manufacturing, more innovation in the U.S., do more of the investment that allows them to compete and win around the world. And so, yeah, the outcome of getting tax reform right, and then what you built on that, what we know in the international tax system is really complex. You know what individual provisions will do. What you don't know is the interaction. It's sort of like, I don't know if you're a Formula One fan, but in that racing, they bring upgrades to their engines throughout the year. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It's the interaction. So what, over the last 6 years, what this committee has seen are how different parts of the international code interact. To your credit, and the work you did with the Senate definitely made improvements that make it easier for companies to invest here, easier to be the global hub, easier to compete and win. So you took it to a new level, building on what we all had sought to achieve in 2017. And America's economy is going to be better for it. So thank you.
Thank you. And the work you put in was incredible. Ms. Webb, I want to ask you a question because I really believe nobody should be in a policy-making decision unless they've actually survived the private sector and worked on commission only and lost their job at least once through no fault of their own. It's a much different playing field than people think it is. And we supply, the people who are profitable supply all this needed revenue that we have. So you're the Vice President for Tax for a company that actually makes things in the United States of America. How have the changes we made this year to the international rules impacted you and when you make decisions about where to invest capital and workers at the margin. So if you would please weigh in that, because you're the person that's on the field every day. You're actually in this, and you either benefit or you look at what the government's put in place and say, I thought you guys were looking for more tax revenue. Please quit making it harder for us to be profitable. So please, Ms. Webb, if you could weigh in on what you do every day in your life.
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. I think, we start with the foundation that TCJA set in creating a much more competitive tax code for the U.S., especially U.S. manufacturers. I mean, if you think about, Sylvamo wasn't a standalone company before TCJA, but I can imagine it would be very difficult for us to operate in an environment where we had to pay 35% tax on the cash that we repatriated. We do have significant international operations, and those operations generate cash that we bring back to the U.S. I think it'd be very difficult for us to succeed if we had to face that 35% repatriation. So that's one aspect. So the TCJA laid that foundation. Now, when you look at the changes that were made in the Big Beautiful Bill, that just really improved upon our ability to succeed. Now, specifically, I'll talk about the modifications to expense allocation. That was pretty important. We pay a significant amount of tax overseas, and that's because our facilities are located near where the resources are that we need for manufacturing. And we also want to be close to where our customers are as well. And so before the changes in the Big Beautiful Bill, we were limited on how much of that foreign tax credit we could use because of expense allocation. And what that did was effectively expand our exposure to GILTI. And the changes to the expense allocation in particular have removed that double taxation burden by giving us credit for those foreign taxes that we pay.
Thank you. I really do believe consistency and certainty. I mean, it's really important that we actually know where we're going and how long we're going to be doing it. The fact that sometimes we're kind of floating out there, it's hard to make a decision when you don't know where you're going. So with that, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I ask my question, I just want to be really clear about what tariffs really are. They're taxes. And right now, there's some of the largest international taxes in the world, paid not by foreign governments, but by American families and American farmers. Professor Clausing, can you explain in plain terms how tariffs have directly cut into farmers' income? What does that look like for an almond farmer, a dairy producer, or a grape grower in a state like mine in California?
Yes, this is a huge issue for farmers, not just in California, but throughout the country. Farmers lose markets abroad when the U.S. puts on these high and reckless tariffs, and they lose markets for a couple of reasons. One, foreign governments retaliate, and two, former consumer sentiment can shift against the United States. We see this in the case of Canada, for instance, where people are less interested in buying American products. Farmers want to sell their products in world markets, and we have some of the most productive farmers in the world, but they're really facing this difficult dilemma of what to do when their markets have dried up. In the past, during the first Trump administration, bailouts were offered to the farmers, and farmers really would much rather sell their product, which is very competitive on world markets, than receive a check for the government. And this has effects not just on farmers, of course, but on the rural communities that surround them.
And what happens in the grocery store? How does this impact the price of groceries?
Yes, as tariffs increase prices on imported foods and services, that raises the cost of those imports, but it also raises the cost of the domestic goods that compete with them. So if the Mexican avocado gets more expensive, the California avocado will also rise due to the smaller supply of foreign avocados, right? So this has been a huge affordability problem for Americans who have struggled with high prices for several years and now facing an administration that's raising costs directly through this massive consumer tax.
Thank you. We spend a lot of time in this committee talking about affordable housing, as we should. It's a real problem in everybody's districts. But my sense is that tariffs have made the cost of housing a lot worse. Tariffs on steel, lumber, appliances, mechanical systems, construction materials, all of this raises the cost of construction and in the end, the cost of a housing. These tariffs are effectively a housing tax, and working families are paying the burden of that. In communities like mine, we're already facing severe affordable housing shortages. How much harder does that shortage become when tariffs increase the cost of materials?
Yes, so tariffs are affecting wood prices, they're affecting metals prices, they're affecting all of those equipment that you mentioned. So housing costs are a significant affordability issue for Americans, and it's been made worse by the tariff policies. I'd point out there's also labor shortages that have affected the cost of construction, and those are also relevant with respect to the administration's policies. And we've seen healthcare costs rising steeply as well, which is to be expected given the big cuts in healthcare funding. And that's a big part of every good, is paying for the healthcare for workers.
Thank you. You've done a good job, and I think we all already know that consumers have taken the brunt of the hit that the tariffs have levied. If the Supreme Court declares President Trump's tariffs unconstitutional and that refunds are owed, shouldn't the consumer really be the one getting the refund?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about tariffs is it manages to hurt many Americans at once. It hurts U.S. businesses and it hurts U.S. consumers. And you're absolutely right that the U.S. consumers are bearing the brunt of these tariffs with higher costs, and they deserve refunds too. But one thing we should note is that businesses are also suffering. They've had to cut into their margins. They faced uncertainty too, right? So there's plenty of unhappiness to go around here, but you're absolutely right that the consumers deserve some relief here.
Well, thank you. I'm working on legislation to make sure that the consumers who paid these costs associated with the tariffs aren't left out of the mix if, in fact, the court does what it looks like they're going to do. And I would appreciate any contribution you could make in helping us make that piece of legislation really good and really reach the consumer. So thank you.
Mr. Schweikert, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brady, it's always a joy to see you, and you know exactly what I'm going to ask. But let's actually walk through a couple possibilities here. Let's say the Supreme Court makes a decision in regards to the enhanced tariff revenues. A decade ago, when you were chairman of Joint Economic Committee and other things, we had meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting with economists, economic modelers, on how to maximize economic growth, stabilize tax receipts, and do it in the most efficient international fashion possible. We designed a destination cash flow tax, that we even looked at things of refundability for certain types of exports. Do you still believe that the work we did several years ago is economically viable? And considering the arbitrage of other countries using their value-added tax and refunding it when they're exporting to us, creating almost like tax arbitrage, is there a path here that we, as I think the most important committee in the world, actually could start to modernize our place in the international trade and actually also stabilize our tax receipts?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman, for asking about this. The reason we pursued a border adjustment tax in the original TCJA, two big reasons. One was competitiveness, because it applies to goods and services coming in the U.S. on a level playing field, but we take it off our exports. It immediately made us dramatically more competitive, especially in those 170 countries with their own version of a border adjustment tax. It also created immediate expensing, almost zero investment tax for the United States, so making sure we were the #1 country in the world to invest in, again, making us dramatically competitive. The simplicity of it was, I think, the beauty, because essentially what this tax would do, the border adjustment tax, would have wiped out huge portions of the international tax code and replaced it with the simple question: do you sell your product here in the United States? Do you sell it here? Doesn't matter where you produce it, doesn't matter how it's done, do you sell it here? Everyone pays exact, at the time, 20% tax. So we basically took away a made in America tax and created a level playing field and sort of a consumption tax in business that really drove simplicity in a big way. So we saw those as big benefits. The other one, Congressman, if you remember, we really believed President Trump's never been shy, about his use of tariffs, his leverage. The border adjustment tax really, I think, was an elegant, a smart way to not just be competitive, but to enhance our trading relationships and our benefits, making us more competitive. And so that's why we had proposed it. As you know, we didn't have the votes. And I think in big part because while the idea's been around for a long time, it was new for many. And when you go bold, you need the time to sit down with the industries and the companies that are impacted. Retailers were concerned, refiners were concerned, others just didn't know. We didn't have the time to sit down and really have some thoughtful conversations about how to make sure those industries and sectors so important in our economy, those issues could be addressed. And so we didn't have the vote. We had to set it aside. I think over time, if you have those thoughtful conversations, Congressman, if you work through those areas of concern, and if you recognize we were seeking to do that so that we could lower taxes on businesses, on families. So we're not using it for spending, we're using it for pro-growth measures, let people keep more of what they earn. I think there is that value. Does it have political support today? I don't know. That's really for members who are interested in that approach to explore further. But at the end of the day, I think the committee, we should always be looking for a way to be more competitive, simplify the code, make us even stronger economically, just as you did, by the way, in this new tax bill, especially in the business provisions, the international tax. It was a great job there.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I hope at some point we get a second round, because I wanted the professors, because some of his writings in regards to some of these things. But I think we intellectually need to be prepared for what's the next step and what would maximize economic prosperity, and particularly for both the left and the right, wage growth. And we have some very good economic modeling underneath this. And with that, I yield back.
Ms. Moore, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee and our extraordinary witnesses. I want to say good morning, particularly to the Honorable Mr. Brady, former member, chairman of this committee. Always good to see you and to welcome you back. I do have a question for you, Mr. Brady. And I just am asking you to imagine yourself back in Congress. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Do you or do you not believe that Congress has trade authority, and would you, as chairman, be fighting for the right of having trade authority?
Well, I actually helped lead the legislation that defined the trade rules for Congress and every administration, making our negotiations more transparent, giving the public time to weigh in, making sure we were building a U.S. consensus on agreements like the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, the most consequential agreement, frankly, on the planet, and one that benefits America in remarkable ways. Congressman, I would talk trade with you all day if I had the opportunity to do that. The reason I'm going to stay focused on international tax today is because I think international tax is actually an area where we can do bipartisan work.
I know think so too, and Mr. Brady, just
you care so much about jobs here at home. America competing and winning, making sure we're locating those manufacturing plants here in the U.S. That's what international tax can do for
Mr.
the
Brady,
constituents we
honest
serve.
to God, I would love to talk about international trade too. We've been briefed on that, but I'm wondering if you think that the tariffs that we have now interfere with our international trade relations. Do they interfere at all?
Yes, so again, Congressman, I think for the hearing today, I would actually encourage my Democrat colleagues to stay focused on the parts of international tax
Gotcha.
because it plays such a crucial role to your constituents back home.
Professor Klausing, let me move on. My good friend, I was looking at Section 232, and the president has imposed tariffs based on a national security threat. And none of the things that we see, the president is mad at somebody, should invoke Section 232. And as a matter of fact, we don't know. There's no transparency, as Mr. Brady talked about the importance of transparency. There's just no transparency about which countries or which items are exempt. We've heard the excuse that a trade deficit is the reason that we've got to do this. We have a trade deficit with Madagascar, for God's sake. I've been there. It's like the poorest place on earth. We're always going to have a trade deficit with them. And so I am wondering, can you speak about the transparency of certain exemptions? For example, there's a company in my district, 97-year-old business called Hellwick Carbon Products. It's a U.S. family-owned manufacturer, and they rely on copper powder from India and Germany to make copper graphite products. Of course, there's no copper processing companies in Wisconsin or in the United States to make copper powder, and the barriers to building one are nearly insurmountable. As I said, this is a 97-year-old thing, and why don't they have a waiver for this company?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I also appreciated your points about national security. Like, one of the goods that we're protecting with national security tariffs right now is kitchen cabinets, and last time I checked, those weren't really a national security issue. The tariffs have been levied with a very mercurial, non-transparent way, and the exemptions are also very non-transparent and uncertain. What we learned in the first Trump administration was that donors to the administration were more likely to get exemptions, and those who donated to opposite parties were less likely to get exemptions. So this is putting sort of a political thumb on the scales in favor of some well-connected and large companies relative to the small ones that may not have the resources to lobby the president and the administration on this issue. So I am a firm believer in markets determining which companies succeed rather than the whims of tariffs, which can also lead to—
So you're not opposed to all tariffs, it's just that this is like willy-nilly, is that your point?
This is very willy-nilly. I think tariffs can have a very limited, narrow use for things like national security or areas where we have a specific thing we need to remedy, but this is way beyond the scope of that, just orders of magnitude larger and more disruptive than that more narrow use.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence. I can see that my time has expired, and I willingly yield back to you, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Appreciate that. Chairman Smith, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. Before I begin, I would like to welcome each and every one of the witnesses. I'm particularly grateful to have my former chairman of the committee, Mr. Kevin Brady, back with us after we were able to make some permanent, so many of those successful tax policies that helped out shepherd the law in 2017. It's good to have you with us. The economic expansion and wage growth, particularly for middle and low-income Americans, that followed the passage of the TCJA inspired and it motivated this Congress. It motivated this Congress to build on those policies and enact additional tax relief for working families and for farmers and for small businesses. Now I'd like to say a few words about ongoing Pillar 2 negotiations and the side-by-side agreement as well. I applaud President Trump's leadership that started on day one of his presidency with an executive order designed to stand up for American companies and American workers, which was absolutely lacking in the prior administration. That executive order led to the Trump administration working with Congress to craft retaliatory measures in the One Big Beautiful Bill to protect American companies and workers from attempts to violate American tax sovereignty. I, along with Senate Finance Chairman Mike Crapo, agreed to remove those retaliatory measures from the bill when the G7 publicly stated its intent to move forward with a side-by-side system that respects the U.S. sovereignty. And let me tell you, I intend to see that June announcement through to the finish line. And the time for action is now for those G7 countries. We expect to see the technical work that has been done in these negotiations move forward this week. We have been patient to allow for all negotiating parties to have the space they need to reach agreement, but they must reach agreement soon. As Chairman Crapo and I said in June, and I'll quote what we said in our release, we are committed to restoring Americans' confidence in our representative government by putting America first. Congressional Republicans stand ready to take immediate action if the other parties walk away from this deal or slow walk its implementation. We mean it then, and you betcha, Mr. Chairman, we mean it now. Perhaps one of the less discussed portions of the 2017 Trump tax cuts were the reforms that addressed what was at that time a troubling behavior on the part of American companies to move their headquarters, their capital investment, and jobs overseas, called corporate inversions. Under President Obama from 2009 to 2016, there were 71 such corporate inversions. And following passage of the 2017 Trump tax cuts, we have seen zero inversions, reversing what was a decades-long pattern under the Obama administration. Chairman Brady, thank you. Chairman Brady, how did the reduction in the corporate tax rate to 21% from an uncompetitive 35%, coupled with reforms like the global intangible low-taxed income provision or GILTI, among others, level the playing field for U.S. companies? And at the time of its enactment, were you expecting that American businesses would respond as favorably as that they did, and basically in the practice of corporate inversions?
So, Mr. Chairman, first let me congratulate you on the achievement of not just extending and making permanent the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but building on and improving it. I can't imagine what would happen if we saw a cruel $4 trillion of tax hikes on families and Main Street businesses, or if you not take the steps to make America more competitive for our businesses and the jobs it creates here at home. So thank you for that. Also, would love to talk more about your role in the OECD and how dangerous a risk that is to the U.S. economy and our businesses. But to answer your question, Mr. Chairman, yes, we did believe that if we got the tax code right, that those inversions would stop. Because the old tax code, you looked at these companies, and I think of those 71, 16 were from Texas. frankly. And it was because the tax code told them to move overseas, or when bought, preference the foreign owner over the U.S. Company. And so that's why we saw that sucking sound leaving the U.S. In all the economic damage that it did. Lowering the corporate rate, I have to tell you, in the whole tax code, I'll tell you, the corporate rate is like the crown jewels of the tax code, in the sense that its impact on jobs and paychecks and competitiveness and innovation can't be matched. And I call it a crown jewel, Chairman, because it's one of those jewels that no matter what setting you put it in, it gets better. So you put it in that research and development, that expensing, the international tax provisions, you link that low corporate rate to those provisions, they all perform better. And it's been a key reason why we've seen the growth, especially in paychecks, as a result of that. And I think, starting into this conversation where people didn't know where the corporate rate would go, they didn't know that you were pondering some very important improvements on the international tax area. And then the permanency, restoring those 3 business provisions, those are incredibly vital to the U.S. economy. And again, a reason why my prediction is we're not going to see, thanks to your work, you're not going to see more inversions in the future, because you made it even more difficult to justify moving operations overseas. You made it much easier and a greater incentive to make the U.S. the global hub for manufacturing, for intellectual property, for innovation, for AI. And so I just want to, having worked with you in TCJA, I would like to personally thank you for your leadership. I know exactly how hard this is. I know the quality of the members you worked with to deliver, not just on time, but ahead of time, and the certainty you created. So personally, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have the hardest working, best team in all of
No
Congress
doubt.
that was able to help deliver the biggest tax cut in U.S. history. One of our primary goals in enacting the working families tax cuts was making as many of the reforms as possible permanent. And we succeeded, including making permanent key pro-growth policies like the 100% expensing, the immediate and R&D expensing, the deduction for interest expense, the 20% small business deduction, and a slate of international tax policies. These policies and others are expected to protect or create 7 million small business jobs and spur more investment in manufacturing right here in the United States. Ms. Webb, why is permanency within our tax code so important, not just for individuals who must plan and save for their family's future, but for American businesses to invest here at home? And how does that permanency benefit the U.S. in the global economic competition? And what else should policymakers be considering to help ensure U.S. businesses are even more competitive in the future?
Thank you for that question. I think Sylvamo is in a very capital-intensive industry. We make paper. In order to make paper, you have to have big manufacturing facilities with lots of equipment. And we recently announced an almost $150 million investment in our South Carolina facility. Well, that investment requires a lot of planning and a lot of equipment. The ability to plan for the future really depends on having a predictable and stable tax environment. New investments like these can take years to plan. And the new equipment that we need for our facilities, well, we can't just go down to our local Home Depot and purchase it off the shelf. It takes years for this equipment to be manufactured. So these investments take time to plan and to be implemented. Therefore, that stability is crucial. And having that stability helps us to compete on that international level, because we can make future decisions about what investments we need and how we can best fund those investments.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. Ms. Delbaney, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank you for holding this hearing, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here and taking the time. I really appreciate it. I want to start with you, Dr. Clausine. You noted in your testimony that the Trump administration's blanket tariffs, with limited exceptions, primarily benefit large firms because they can afford to lobby for these special exemptions while small businesses can't, and therefore they're stuck paying the full price of the tariff. If the Supreme Court strikes down IEEPA, how will small businesses be impacted differently than large businesses?
Yes, it partly depends on how the Supreme Court handles the issue of refunds and how broad their ruling is. But one difficulty will be that the small businesses won't have as much resources available to try to pursue the legal remedies to get their money back. And of course, we discussed earlier before your arrival that this could also be harmful for consumers who've already faced the big tax increase, but who aren't going to be mailed checks to compensate them for those heavy tariffs.
If IEEPA tariffs are struck down, how can we assure that the administration doesn't make small businesses pay the price?
Yeah, so if the IEEPA tariffs are struck down, the administration has indicated they're going to try to pursue similar policies using other authorities. This is why I think it's so important that this body recognize that Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives Congress the power to tax. And that includes your oversight over all of these types of trade remedies. Certainly kitchen cabinets aren't a national defense issue, and there are lots of other things that might be claimed as defense, for instance, that aren't necessarily defense. Taking the care to legislate on tariffs, I think, would be important.
I agree. The administration has also claimed that its tariff policy is designed to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., but as you know, tariffs on intermediate goods make it more expensive to manufacture in the United States. So it's not surprising that we've seen a decline in U.S. blue-collar employment since Trump's tariffs went into effect. That's not been an increase. And so surely there's a better way to do this. What principles would you use to guide a strategic approach to tariff policy that benefits, not harms, American businesses and workers?
Yes, you're exactly right about the harms to manufacturing and to investment. And one thing that concerns me about this present time is that the headwinds from the tariffs are going to offset any positive effects that we might expect from provisions like expensing. And that's part of why we see this net decline in blue-collar employment, which is a real problem. So the principles under which tariffs should be used, I think, are very narrow. There's better instruments for almost every policy goal. If you want an industry to expand, you can subsidize it without also providing the consumers a big tax. And there are some narrow areas, of course, where foreign governments might have done something where you want to respond with a narrow targeted tariff. But I don't think it would entail anything like over a $2 trillion tax increase over a decade to address these very narrow things. So I would focus on areas where we think tariffs are the best, most direct policy response, but I would argue that in almost every instance, they're not going to be the ideal response.
And another good reason to go through Congress.
Yes.
Chairman Brady, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here. It's strange to see you sitting down there. You've been a dedicated advocate for the benefit of trade deals and that bring economies closer through shared rules and reduced tariffs. During this administration, you have remarked that Republicans don't count on tariffs for revenue because they are so economically damaging both in prices and in slowing the economy. Yet Trump has repeatedly suggested replacing income taxes with tariff revenue, but only Democrats seem willing to point out how far-fetched and damaging that proposal would be. So what do you make of the president's proposal, and do you think Congress would have to approve such an approach?
So, one, I absolutely believe in the freedom to trade. I think it's one of our greatest economic freedoms. It's the reason, the ability to buy, sell, and compete around the world with as little interference as possible, the freedom, if someone builds a better mousetrap, the freedom to buy it for your family or business. If you build that better mousetrap, the freedom to sell it around the world legally to customers there, I think are huge freedoms for us. I think there is a great deal of uncertainty about what the impact will be, of these tariffs, how they eventually work out. Where there is certainty are the economic benefits from this new tax bill, both for working families, certainly for Main Street businesses, and the economy as a whole. We know the bill that this Congress just passed is going to help, again, leapfrog and keep us in the lead as the most desirable place in the world to do business.
Thank you. Helps if Congress actually makes decisions, though, on what happens with tariffs. But thank you. I appreciate it. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Arrington, you're recognized
Thank
for
you,
5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, witnesses. Big shout out to my fellow Texan mentor, our fearless leader and the architect of this current tax regime that has unleashed prosperity for every American at every level and has put our nation back at the top where we belong. And I thank you for your service. I've got a lot of thoughts and some questions along the way. I think it's telling that my Democrat colleagues have pivoted from tax to trade. I'm going to take that as tacit support for the incredible benefits that have accrued as a result of Republican pro-growth tax policy. I mean, there's just not much to criticize. I mean, let's just go through it. Give me a quick yes or no, if you would, Mr. Chairman. After TCJA, as we say in Texas, proof's in the pudding. Job creation up?
Yes.
Record?
Yep.
Unemployment down?
Record levels hit the 50-year low, especially in the poverty rates for people of color.
So
and those
poverty
who've been
rates,
left
were
behind.
they record low?
Yes.
What about wages? Were they up?
Yeah, the first 3 years after Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the 9% average real wage growth. So in other words, your wages are growing faster than inflation are still the 3 highest years of record.
What about that capital parked overseas? It's United States earned income. Were we able to repatriate that as a result of our positive pro-growth tax policies?
As designed by this committee in this bill, yes. More than $1.5 trillion flooded back in the United States to be invested here. But not just that. We saw intellectual property, manufacturing, research follow that back in the United States as well.
Corporate rates went down, but what happened to corporate revenue back to the Treasury?
Yeah, so we hit some of the highest levels of corporate revenue that we've seen in the country. As you'd imagine, there was an initial dip, and then with the economic growth, and because, if you recall, within the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, businesses paid for, corporations paid for more than 80% of the corporate tax rate through the offsets that we created. And so, yes, you saw record revenue.
Do you remember
in the corporate area.
what the economic output was at the tail end of Obama's tenure? It was 1.8 after the policies on trade, on tax, on energy. Right before COVID, it was 2.8. 1% of economic growth represents $3 trillion in the budget window. So we actually strengthened the balance sheet of the federal government. But that's happening now. It's happening now. Ms. Clausing, Professor Clausing talked about her concerns. I don't question her sincerity. She called tariffs a regressive tax. I assume you believe that inflation is a regressive tax as well, yes or no?
It depends on what happens to wages.
Well, it doesn't depend in West Texas, let me tell you. 22% cumulative increase in prices over the Biden administration because of their mainly unbridled spending, but record, by the way, deficit spending. You mentioned you're concerned about deficits. Well, the deficit went up at a record rate. If you include the interest cost on the debt, it's about $12 trillion. That is a feat that will never be replicated. Let me tell you something about the regressive tax. The regressive tax of inflation was, let's go look at just look at the 10-year Treasury. It was 1.1 at the beginning of Biden administration and Democrat control of Congress, 4.4% 10-year Treasury rates. They have gone down now. It's 4.1 and coming down. The 30-year rates are coming down. The fixed mortgage rate went from 2.8 at the beginning of the Biden administration to a record 7.8. I say record, it was a 23-year high. Americans who were buying homes were paying $1,000 on average more a month for their homes because of the cost of living crisis that was happening. So I know that you are sincere about your concerns about this. So let me also take your statement here about the $1,700 a year that you say could be an increase from tariffs. It is ironic that that's how much in wages were lost relative to inflation a month for median household incomes. That's unbelievable, but it's all changing. Prices are coming down, actually. The mortgage rates are coming down. About $30,000 over the life of a 30-year mortgage is the value of that decrease. Wages are going up. We're finally outpacing inflation. So it's working. I have so many thoughts about the trade deal. The Democrats did nothing on trade, nothing. Trade activity increased under the first Trump administration because of using his trade authorities, and we had a 25% increase. It helped manufacturing wages. It helped build out that which was hollowed out in middle America for years. We got better deals. We have 15 new open market deals today as a result of the president's leadership. There's no leadership. I've seen no leadership since Kevin Brady was here on trade, and this president is doing it, and we're all the better for it. Thank God we've got somebody that's willing to take the slings and arrows on both sides to level the playing field and have fair trade that undergirds true free trade. God bless America.
Mr. Snyder, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly, and I want to thank Chairman Kelly and Ranking Member Thompson for holding this hearing on international tax and global competitiveness. I think it's important. I think it's also important to clear up some of the things that I believe I'm hearing said. For example, I believe my colleague just said prices are falling. Well, I will tell you my constituents home are not seeing prices falling. Prices of groceries are up. We just experienced it on Thanksgiving. Prices of housing are up. Prices for energy are up. And if you talk to anybody in this country right now, prices for health care are going through the roof. They're getting premium notices telling them their premiums for next year are not just going up a little bit, they're going up 100, 200%. Nationally, the average is 114%. In my district, it's at 78%. That's just unacceptable. Now, we're here to talk about taxes, and no one likes paying taxes, and that includes tariffs. They are a tax on the American people. But we have tax policy. The reason this is the oldest and first committee in our government is because we know that taxes are how we pay for what we want to do as a nation, as a society, and we work to find a way to do that. The policy we create on this committee matters, and the policy we create can create incentives, opportunities for economic growth, that create jobs, that provide wealth and a future for our children, but can also create disincentives. And the policies we make here drive the decisions people make at home. They make in their own pocketbooks at their kitchen table. But as we talk about international tax in particular, it's about business decisions. And it's business decisions large and small companies make that drive our economy. I heard earlier the conversation about inversions. Inversions aren't a new idea. They started really in 1983. And it's because of the policies created by the tax code that created the incentive for companies to move. These aren't business strategies that drove inversions. It was tax policies that drove the decisions to make inversions. And Congress made an effort to stop that. I wasn't here. It was the early 2000s. George Bush was the president that passed the laws in 2001, in 2003, and 2004 that created some stability and reduced the number of inversions, but there were loopholes in that bill. And the loopholes of the policies created by this committee in the early 2000s is what led to the inversions in the mid part of the 2000 and 2010s. This is where I get frustrated because there are things we agree. I think we all agree that inversions are bad. That's not a Republican-Democrat issue, and we can all work together. And I am glad that we took these steps to flip the switch and turn those inversions off. That's not good for the U.S. economy. Chairman Brady, thank you for leading that effort. I wish we had done it in a more bipartisan way. And why is that important? Well, Ms. Webb, you talked about your experience as a business operator, business owner. We need business owners, large and small, make their decisions. What will they need to succeed? They need a stable business environment. And that is affected by the political instability and the tax policy instability that is affecting American companies today. And that's why it's so frustrating. You talked about making a $150 million investment in South Carolina. In my district, a company made the decision to cancel a $100 million investment in my district with all that meant in construction and jobs on April 9th because of the tariff policy that President Trump announced. And I'm proud that that company is leading the charge, and it was at the Supreme Court trying to get those policies reversed because it's hurting small businesses. Tariff and tax policy belongs starting in this committee. That's why it was set up that way, because we face our voters every 2 years. We're closest to our voters. We understand the issues in the district, and that's what matters. The stability that we need to provide to the American economy comes from having conversations that lift up small businesses, American workers, American families to make the decisions. But we need to do it in a fiscally responsible way. I realize I'm not going to ask a question. I got on a soapbox. But the deficit for the last 2 months of fiscal year 25 was $1.7 trillion for the last 2 months. That's not sustainable. And that was not because of the last administration. That's the policies this administration is taking. And manufacturing for the last 9 months has contracted in this country. The policies the administration is taking and the failure of our Congress under Speaker Johnson to take policies to lift up the economy means that we're losing jobs, we're shrinking manufacturing. If we're not making things in this country, we're not prepared for the future. So I appreciate that there's a desire to celebrate the bills that passed. Well, no one's happy with the OBB. They're feeling that pain. We should be talking in this committee about international tax, the need to get to a decision and a conclusion on Pillar 2 by the end of this year, and to work to level, Speaker Brady, you said, or Chairman Brady, you said it perfectly. We need to level the playing field so American companies, American workers, American families can compete. They can buy products that meet the needs for themselves and their families, and the American economy can grow in a way that leads the world as it should. I didn't mean to have a long speech, but I did. I yield back.
Thank you. Now, pursuant to committee practice, we'll now move to a 2-to-1 questioning. Mr. Hearn, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the witnesses for being here. Before we get into today's testimony, I want to give credit where credit's due. First of all, I want to say thank you to my dear friend, Mr. Snyder, on his comments on international tax. It's spot on. It's something that we know works. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for all your work and your leadership on that. I want to thank this administration and Secretary Besson for their relentless, unwavering fight to protect American tax sovereignty in the OECD negotiations. The previous administration gave away significant leverage in pursuit of a deal that was highly damaging to the American worker. The Trump administration has refused to surrender our tax sovereignty, the very power our founders enshrined in Article 1, Section 7, when the shot heard around the world was fired over the principle that Americans, and only Americans, will decide how Americans are taxed and governed. That principle is not negotiable. I will say that again. It's not negotiable, not in 1775 and not in 2025. And as long as I have the privilege of serving in this body, I will fight anyone, foreign or domestic, who tries to take that away from us. I'm hopeful that the negotiated side-by-side agreement will protect U.S. businesses and U.S. workers from the harmful effects of Pillar 2. Without a G7 side-by-side agreement, Pillar 2 puts U.S. multinationals at a disadvantage by first exposing them to 2 layers of minimum taxes, the first of its kind in the U.S. system and the emerging OECD system, and 2, subjecting their traditional income-based tax incentives to stricter scrutiny than the corporate welfare programs in China and the EU. Under current OECD rules, traditional tax incentives can easily trigger the OECD minimum tax, enabling other countries to erode the U.S. tax base. Conversely, direct cash handouts or refundable tax credits favored by the OECD are more likely to be protected from the OECD minimum tax regime. Chairman Brady, you and I together sent multiple letters and inquiries to Secretary Yellen regarding these major competitive advantages that she ultimately turned a blind eye to in her pursuit of a global tax deal. Professor Klossing, I don't know what you may have seen those. You may have used those as target practice in the trash can, but we never got a response at all from any of those letters that we sent. And it's very unfortunate. And I think even my Democrat colleagues were opposed to those initiatives that were put forth by Secretary Yellen. Mr. Chairman, it is no secret that other countries are desperate for revenue and will do anything to take it from the U.S. fisc. How concerned are you about the proliferation of DSTs, digital service taxes, and other forms of novel extraterritorial taxation popping up outside of Pillar 2?
So a couple thoughts, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Hearn. First, thanks for your leadership on the international tax area. Congratulations, and I applaud you for recognizing, all of you, the dangers of OEC Pillar 2. I would love to talk more about how out of the norm, how out of every traditional practice that Secretary Yellen, who I have a great relationship with, worked with her on monetary policy at the Federal Reserve, but how that drove America to the brink of a very damaging Pillar 2. But for this committee's leadership, we might be in a different, and President Trump, different position today. So digital service taxes are a horrible idea. It is a significant concern to the U.S. And this committee. They are, at the heart, discriminatory and clearly intended to target U.S. companies, as you know. And other countries are pretty open about that's what they're seeking to do, grab a major part of the U.S. tax base. They're typically, taxes are imposed on gross revenues, not this. Income that you're not eligible for foreign tax credits, so American companies would be double taxed while we're giving away our tax base. And so, as you know, President Trump and Secretary Bessent really have focused on digital services taxes as part of the bilateral trade negotiations they're having today. They see this as these taxes as protectionist measures that distort trade flows, discriminate against America. In an ideal world, Congressman, I would hope foreign countries would repeal or respond in a way that doesn't invite further tariff action. I think that is exactly what needs to be done here. And in truth, I'm not convinced businesses in those countries that are imposing these digital service taxes think this is such a good idea either. So I actually think there is some common ground within the business community around the world against these damaging taxes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Estes. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for all of our witnesses for being here today. It's great to be able to talk about this issue that's so important for us as a country in terms of how do we keep our economy going, moving forward. Starting off, I want to bolster the comments that Chairman Smith said earlier regarding the current Pillar 2 side-by-side negotiations with OECD. As you know, members of this committee agreed to have Section 899 pulled from the reconciliation bill due to the G7 agreement. And I want to commend the work that Treasury's been doing to address this point, to ensure that the U.S. tax code is treated fairly in a side-by-side agreement with Pillar 2. It's been from day one, actually, the Trump administration and Secretary Bessent have been very actively involved in helping address that. However, we have 28 days left in the year, and I'm concerned that other countries and certain bureaucrats are also just slow-walking the process. It's my understanding that the treatment of substance-based tax incentives is one of the stumbling blocks. I want to emphasize, as mentioned earlier, that non-refundable U.S. tax credits must be treated equitably with other countries' refundable tax credits. And if they're not, this will adversely affect inbound investment into the United States and will certainly harm our tax base. I also want to emphasize that a swift resolution to this issue before the end of the year, without a swift resolution of this issue, would necessarily drive us to look at how do we bring back those protectionary measures in order to protect the U.S. tax base. Moving on, I want to focus on how the reconciliation bill enhanced and reinforced America First pro-growth international policies that have been incredibly successful since the passage of TCJA in 2017. The timely conversation is important that we can further sound tax policy and ensure that American businesses are successful globally. The reconciliation bill made several beneficial tweaks to BEAT, GILTI, and FDII. There's some of those acronyms again, Chairman. By locking in rates and simplifying the underlying calculations, and of course, coming up with some brand new acronyms in the process. I think there's further work that we can do in this space. Talking about BEAT, consideration of the high tax exemption and allowing deductions for payments already subject to U.S. tax would encourage businesses to bring more intellectual property back into the United States. With NCTI, or formerly GUILTY, as the new acronym has been created, we would fully eliminate the foreign tax credits. We could eliminate the foreign tax credit haircut to simplify tax rules. And with the new acronym FDDEI, formerly the FDII, only in government can you create that jumbled word salad. We could make beneficial changes to this provision that would further incentivize companies to build, service, and maintain future intellectual property here in the United States. We could also enhance future investments in the U.S. by allowing taxpayers to deduct the cost of constructed assets as they occur, rather than waiting until completed properties placed in service. Chairman Brady, it's good to see you again as we talk through these issues. The working family tax cuts put us back on task to restoring immediate R&D expensing and full expensing for most domestic investments. But there's more we can do to help make sure the United States is the best place to invest and hold highly mobile assets. Looking ahead, what additional pro-growth reforms, such as allowing taxpayers to deduct the cost of pro-growth reforms and assets as they're incurred, or strengthening location of IP in the U.S., or simplifying our tax credits and audit adjustment rules that would best position the United States for the next generation?
Yeah, so first, Congressman, thanks for your leadership here, and including in the OECD in Section 899. You did good work in the international tax space. It will ensure America continues to be the best place in the world to build and invest. But more can be done. I think first, I would recommend, deliver stability and certainty in the provisions you've just changed. I think the biggest concern for businesses is these are excellent changes. Will they be here for the long haul? I think that's important. Treasury regulations can create the certainty and stability and deliver the results you, Congress, did in this bill. So continue to work with Treasury in these areas. I sense, like in 2017, where they were eager to work to the intent of Congress, they're doing the exact same thing here today. I really applaud their efforts on deregulation of tax provisions and regulation within Treasury. That's key. I think you ought to keep working with that. And I think there's some more provisions within the Senator Tillis 2.0 legislation has sort of a laundry list of continued improvements in that international tax space. I think those are some good ideas, some more important than others. It would be a good place to have those conversations.
Well, thank you. I appreciate those comments. Appreciate your comments on the digital service taxes and the problems associated there.
Yes, sir.
I just appreciate Chairman Kelly with you holding this hearing to talk about how do we help make sure U.S. is competitive in the international marketplace.
Thank you, Mr. Byer, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Thompson. Thanks for doing this. Mr. Chairman, welcome back.
Thank you.
Our professors, Mrs. Webb, Ms. Webb. First, I want to say, I don't know anybody here that objected to cutting the 35% corporate tax rate. It was certainly way too high. We have a debate about how low it would go. I just looked up the effective rate right now is not 21%, it's 16%. So it's never actually been 35. And amazingly, corporate tax revenue as a percentage of our GDP is 1.3%, almost the lowest in the wealthy world. We are relying on consumers to pay taxes, citizens, not corporations. We're very, very low. This is a great place to do business. I also have a different perspective than most because I got to serve as the ambassador of Switzerland for 4 years, where the bulk of my time was spent on tax avoidance because of people that were hiding their money there. In fact, there were 600 U.S. companies in little Zug alone. Zug is about the size of Falls Church, but it was a great place to be an American company. Because the whole rationale for Pillar 2 and for Janet Yellen's work and for work that many Democrats and Republicans have done is to try to get away from tax havens and tax avoidance. This whole notion of profit shifting, putting your expenses in the high tax jurisdictions and putting all your profit in the low tax jurisdictions. And this was a real decrement to U.S. competitiveness and people are just fleeing the country. This, yes, part of inversion was our 30% rate, but also a lot of it was tax havens. And we have not addressed that. The base erosion is still very real. And by pretending it doesn't exist, we're sticking our head in the sand. But if this thing is not just about tariffs, it's about global growth. Let's look at the fact that our global growth this year is 1.8%. The rest of the world is 3.2%, almost double. We're getting hammered. We're way below we were. Back we complained about Biden inflation, fair enough. But the growth is a lot faster in 2024 and 2023 and 2022. And why? Well, look at the drags on growth right now. We have this, no one here objects to deporting criminals who don't belong in this country legally. But we have literally millions of people who've been here generations with American spouses and American children and American parents that we are now locked up in Farmville or deporting. But construction industries, the agricultural industries, meat packing, car dealerships, everywhere is hurting for people because their people are gone. And for the first time, I think, ever, we're actually having a shrinking of the American workforce in the history of this country. Number two, we have gutted science. NHTSA, NASA, NOAA, EPA, the CDC, National Science Foundation cut by 56%. NIH, and what we've done to our colleges and universities. This is the worst time for research and development in American history right now. So it is no surprise that we're dragging. But the biggest thing are the tariffs. And Dr. Clausing, I'm so glad you're here. It's day 317. Has the president delivered on his promise to lower costs for the American people?
No, he hasn't, and you're right that there are many factors for that, but it includes the reduction in labor supply from immigration. The tariffs are huge, which have been directly attacks on households, but also higher health care costs due to both OB3 changes and the expiration of the premium tax credits. Those are all big cost issues.
Yeah, it's remarkable, too. By the way, China is having the biggest year it's ever had in terms of exports. Our trade policy has been a gift to our main competitive partner, competitor in the world. It looks like $2,000 just an extra cost for groceries alone. I just noticed that 42% of Americans feel that grocery costs are the single biggest impediment to their growth. Ms. Del Bene asked a very good question about what happens on the exemption stuff. Dr. Clausing, again, we've seen the literally giving of gifts to the president. You know, gold bars, gold Rolex clocks on the desk in order to get reductions in tariffs. How is this exemption process doing anything more than boosting the profits of trade lobbyists here in Washington?
It's really troubling, and study after study has shown the harmful effects of corruption on economic growth. It hurts investment, it hurts competition, it hurts efficiency, and I would expect the same here, even if the tariffs were a good policy, which they very clearly aren't. The manner in which they're enhancing corruption is highly problematic and dysfunctional.
Thank you, Representative Chairman Brady. I just want to thank you for fighting for Congress's authority, for trade authority, and promise you that we're going to do our damnedest to pull back IEPA, 232s, and other inappropriate giving away of our constitutional right to the president, many presidents, Democrat and Republican, over the years. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Kustoff, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for convening us today, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing. Ms. Webb, thank you for appearing. We're proud to have Sylvamo in the Memphis area, and you are a great corporate employer, great resource for our community. If I could, I know we spent some time this morning talking about kind of the macro impact of the working families tax cut. We know that domestic investment, economic growth, global competitiveness, they're all critically important. With that being said, the bill will also have an impact, really a lasting impact, on the day-to-day lives of American workers. Their wages, their benefits, their future employment opportunities, their quality of life. Can you talk specifically about how these tax cuts will benefit the workers at Sylvamo?
Sure. Thank you for the question. You know, the tax cuts and the Big Beautiful Bill definitely help us to strengthen our cash position as a company. And that matters because we regularly reevaluate compensation for our employees to make sure that that our pay in every market is competitive. And when our tax burden goes down, that gives us more flexibility and more resources to then invest in our people. While pay decisions are based on market data and the needs of our business, the big, beautiful bill tax relief absolutely gives us more room to stay competitive and support our employees. And it helps us succeed, and anytime we succeed, that helps our employees succeed and then the communities that we're a part of.
Thank you. I was going through your annual report, and there was a passage on page 23 about the substantial capital that Savamo requires to keep the operations going. Maybe if I read from the corporate report, the annual report rather, page 23, we make capital investments, sometimes substantial, primarily to expand and replace existing facilities and equipment, improve our operations, and comply with changes in environmental laws and regulations. Key pieces of equipment in our various manufacturing facilities may, perhaps unexpectedly, need to be repaired or replaced. And it goes on to say in 2025, we will make significant capital investments to enhance and upgrade our manufacturing operations, et cetera. So the reason I bring this up is the Working Families Tax Cuts included two provisions designed to incentivize capital investment here in our country, the type of investments that Savamo must make to succeed. One, it makes permanent 100% expensing for investments into machinery and equipment. And then secondly, it provides 100% expensing for structures or facilities used for domestic manufacturing. So can you talk about how those provisions in this bill that we passed on July 3rd, what that means for Savamo's capital investment strategy going forward?
Absolutely. Those investments that we're making are made significantly more affordable by those favorable provisions in the Big Beautiful Bill, and that saves us cash that we can then further invest in our mills and our people. While there are a number of factors that influence when and where a company invests, tax benefits of those investments are certainly a consideration. We operate in a tough industry, in a market where our overall demand for our product is declining. And while it's true that the demand for paper in the U.S. is declining, it still remains a very attractive market for us and one that we want to be a part of and succeed in. A lot of the decisions around making new investments is making sure that we get a good return on that investment. And the math just gets a lot easier when we have competitive tax policies like low rates and immediate expensing.
Thank you, Ms. Webb. Thank you for appearing. Chairman Brady, we're glad to have you here, glad to have you back. I'm going to ask you maybe an unfair question.
Be gentle, Mr. Congressman.
I think you can handle it. If you could return as the chair of this committee for one day and pass a tax package to build upon the TCJA and the Working Families Tax Cut, what would your number one priority be?
So I will just tell you, you did good work in this bill. You did important work in this bill, both locking in these low rates for our businesses and families, restoring fully the three business provisions so pro-growth. But the improvements you made, the international tax, is going to translate into a much stronger economy and much stronger America here at home. So I will just tell you, and you did it in record time, beat every expectation there. So you have a great deal to be proud of in the work that you've just achieved.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Malliotakis, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. I think we, as a committee, have a lot to be proud of. And this year we already passed, as was mentioned, many pro-growth, pro-American business tax policies, including making numerous provisions of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act permanent. But it has already, as you've mentioned and testified to, led to significant investment, job creation, and we're excited to see what the Big Beautiful Bill will bring. Since 2017, these policies have demonstrated substantial increases in domestic manufacturing and investment, and they have helped prevent companies from shifting profits overseas or moving their headquarters to other countries. As Chairman Smith mentioned earlier. We saw 71 companies leaving under President Obama, 0 under President Trump since TCJA has passed. That is significant, and that is putting America first. The Working Families Tax Cuts Act will build on the domestic growth, projecting to protect and create over 7.2 million jobs, including 1.4 million manufacturing jobs, and generate $284 billion in economic growth from manufacturing, thanks to the 100% immediate expensing for machinery and equipment, 100% expensing for manufacturing structures, and research and development expensing as well. We've already seen, in just the first 11 months of this administration, working with Republican trifecta, we have already seen trillions of dollars in investment in the United States from all sorts of companies: Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, Eli Lilly, Hyundai, Ford, Honda, Meta, Apple, NVIDIA. I can go on and on. These are companies that have each invested tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars each here in the United States, everything from expanding their workforce to whether it's expanding manufacturing facilities and their capacity to do here, make in America. It is fantastic to see that things are moving in the right direction. As was mentioned by my other colleague, inflation has come down 9.1% high under Joe Biden and Democrat control. Once Republicans took the House in 2023, we saw that coming down because we stopped that wasteful spending that led to the inflation. Now, Republican trifecta, it is a third, 3% of what it was, a third of what it was when the Democrats had control. Interest rates come down, mortgage rates coming down, gas prices are coming down. So my question is, how do we build on this? And I have legislation called the Medical Manufacturing, Economic Development, and Sustainability Act. It aims to strengthen domestic manufacturing by encouraging U.S. companies to reshore operations from nations that pose a risk to the United States medical preparedness into economically distressed zones here at home. It does so by providing a dollar-for-dollar credit against federal taxes for the wages and investments to make economically distressed zones attractive and to really get us out of communist China. That is the true goal of this bill. Chairman Brady, how can such incentives attract global investment, and do you see an advantage in customizing these incentives to bring medical manufacturing back from China to distressed communities here?
Yes, so I think, Congressman, thank you for your work on tax reform. I hope you enjoyed the process and the outcome in your service here on the committee. So I think COVID pandemic really pulled the curtain back, showed where we were vulnerable. Excuse me, I've got a cold. Really exposed that we needed to do more in the area of medicines, medical equipment, and essential ingredients, certainly in a way that secured that manufacturing supply chain for the U.S., including anchoring some of those key industries and products here in the U.S., making sure it's running through reliable trade partners. I think the work that you've done on this new provision for structures, I think is going to be very helpful in your goal, because that was what we heard from businesses here. The lower rate was hugely expensive. The business provisions that you restored and made permanent really key as well. But I think that it's going to be interesting to see what that structure incentive does. I think it's that tied with the expensing and the equipment is really, I think, going to be helpful. Your thought is tailor that more and focus it toward distressed communities. Is that your thinking?
Yes, and I think that would go a long way in helping these communities develop, create jobs, and give people good paying work here in the United States. And also, obviously, as we look to reshore, it takes a while. It takes years to get a new facility online, particularly if we're talking about a new piece of legislation like mine. But we also need to have responsible trade policies. I have a Medical Supply Chain Resiliency Act that allows the President the ability to enter into trade agreements for medical goods with trusted trade partners by empowering the U.S. trade rep to enter its agreements, reducing barriers that actively discourage domestic manufacturing. What do you think of giving that the President more authority to work with trusted partners? Do you think that is a good way that we can couple trade with the tax incentives?
You know, I think I think we're fortunate in that the authority the Congress over the years has given to the president is very expansive, provides the ability, I think, to work with those trusted partners. I think, frankly, for affordability, for full supply, for the ability for the U.S. to be competitive in these industries against countries like China and other foreign competitors. I think the trade agreements like USMCA would be a great example of that, but others are really key to those resilient supply chains. And I think there's an opportunity now. I think the whole world understands where the president wants to go in those crucial industries and in products.
Ms. Plaskett, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Of course, I want to thank the witnesses that are here, especially the former chair of the committee, the Honorable Kevin Brady, and to the professors and the other witnesses that are here giving us their expert opinion. Of course, this is very interesting. You know, as a lawyer, I know that 3 lawyers will come up with 5 different opinions, and it appears that tax policy and tax lawyers, tax experts will do the same in terms of different opinions given the same data and what it means. I'm, however, looking at how things are affecting the American people and how Americans feel and how their everyday lives are. And I think so many of us here in Congress have been sent here to do that, to give opportunity and support to Americans so that their lives are better. While we're growing our economy, while we're continuing to try to make and keep America to be the best country in the world. Of course, we need a robust economy to do that. We need manufacturing and corporations. We need American innovation. I know my colleague Tom Swazi is not here, but I love his coin that he's a democratic capitalist. I would agree wholeheartedly that many of us on the committee are the same. But while we are looking at issues such as corporations and how well corporations are doing, I don't think the American people would say that they're doing as well as they have been. The tariffs have increased prices for American businesses, the small businesses, as well as workers, costing U.S. households so much more. These deliberate price hikes and tariffs, especially, are making American lives unaffordable. And I don't think, and we saw in 2017 with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that while it helped corporations, American homes were not doing as well. And particularly in the Virgin Islands, I think we know that the provision authorizing the U.S. Virgin Islands Economic Development Program was affected by GILTI. Because oftentimes when tax policy is written, it seems to help corporations, but not in terms of thinking about those small individuals. The imposed GILTI tax regime on investments by U.S. residents in the Virgin Islands businesses has acted as a tariff on the United States Virgin Islands, an American territory. I'm really grateful to my colleague Ron Estes, who worked with me to sponsor legislation to restore economic vitality and investment in the Virgin Islands, the Revive VI Act, which fixed unintentional problems and restored the Virgin Islands' right to have an economic development program that would benefit our economy and workforce. And I'm hopeful that he and I will continue to be able to work on that. You know, we're talking about inflation outpacing wages, and it seems to be so for everyone except the wealthiest. Recent reports from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York show skyrocketing personal debt for American families, with both housing and non-housing debt eclipsing previous records. So we can't say that the economy is going well if the American people are not experiencing that at the kitchen table. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters. That's what's important. Professor Clausing, we've heard a lot from my colleagues across the aisle and other witnesses about how TCJA and the One Big Beautiful Bill has had a wonderful effect on wages and growth. Is that your reading of the economic evidence? And what do you see as the main consequences of these legislative packages for the economy?
Thank you so much for that question and for your work. If you asked 100 economists to look at the data of what happened in the years after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and just look at the series of wages and the series of investment and the series of deficits and debt, they would have a hard time identifying when that tax cut happened because the underlying trends were nearly unchanged. There's been some very careful econometric work which has unpeeled some small benefits from the expensing provisions, but no discernible effect on wages. And one of the reasons is that the legislation expanded deficits and debt, and that acts as a drag on the economy. A lot of debt was added during the Trump administration. A lot of debt is being added now. That raises interest rates and increases costs for households, and that effect really dominates these other effects. In fact, when they did a dynamic score at Congressional Budget Office of the House version of OB3, they found that it had a higher cost than when they did a static score. And what that means is that the negative growth effects were dominating and making the legislation even more costly once you accounted for the fact that it had those negative consequences.
Thank you. My time is up. I yield back.
Mr. Feaster, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly and Ranking Member Thompson. Thank you for holding this hearing, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. The work we accomplished earlier this year through the Working Families Tax Cut enhanced what was already one of the most successful pro-growth tax policies we've ever seen. By making these international tax provisions permanent and encouraging new domestic investment, we will lower costs for families, supporting stronger supply chains, and increase U.S. production, and provide millions of new high-paying American jobs. These permanent tax policies give businesses the certainty they need to invest and expand. The benefits under international tax to U.S. manufacturers and consumers started through Tax Cuts and Jobs Act with the benefits of FDII deduction. Ms. Webb, you do business around the world. Could you quickly tell us how FDII deduction has helped enable your business to grow since it was founded in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2021?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. So the FDII deduction lowers the tax rate that we pay on exports, and it encourages companies to manufacture in the U.S. Our business is most profitable when we can maximize the operational time of our facilities. Frankly, it's difficult for a mill to be profitable if it's not running at full capacity. Our primary focus with our domestic manufacturing is to serve the domestic market. But there could be situations where if we have operational downtime, exporting provides a way of alleviating that pain, but it has to make economic sense and be cost effective. So the FDII deduction helps manufacturers like us utilize these export markets to keep our production lines moving because it does lower that tax on that export income. So it's a vital deduction for manufacturers.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Webb. I see this as we try to grow. I'm from Iowa, and if we want to grow manufacturing in Iowa, here's the incentive. I truly believe that we're going to see a tremendous amount of onshoring as businesses say, hey, we want to bring more of our manufacturing back to the U.S. So dealing with that, Ms. Webb, I want to also ask you a question. So already we've been heard how important it is to you, but by removing the qualified business asset investment offset of the FDII deduction, it became FDII, and will no longer penalize the deduction based on tangible assets located in the U.S., broadening this incentive further than just intellectual property and supporting investment into the United States. Ms. Webb, you have significant numbers of tangible assets in the U.S. Could you explain how you can expect this to change with this new impact for your company?
Absolutely, and I still refer to it as FDII. I can't quite get used to the new acronym.
I can't either, by the way.
But I think removing this penalty for tangible assets is a very important step to promote manufacturing in America. Manufacturing is an industry that has both a lot of exports, but also a lot of tangible assets. So given that the objective of the administration and this Congress is to expand manufacturing, This policy certainly supports that by removing a hurdle that limited our ability to fully take advantage of that FDII deduction.
Yeah, thank you. And again, what we're trying to do here is grow and expand manufacturing in the U.S., and this is what's going to happen. I just applaud this bill and how it's going to perform. And we just heard from one of the leaders and innovators in the paper industry how it's going to work. So thank you for that. I got a question for Chairman Brady. Chairman, as we look forward, how do we stay ahead of the curve of when it comes to attracting investment into the United States through the improvements to FDII and pro-growth international tax policies? I mean, we see now that there's a lot of other countries trying to do different things, and how do we stay on the forefront of making sure that businesses come here to innovate?
Yeah, so first, I hope you're enjoying your time on the committee. I was impressed the first day I met you when I realized that as a leader in the Iowa legislature, you conformed Iowa's tax laws to the TCJA. And I think the results are proving out back home to your constituents in the state. And the answer is the international tax area is complex. And the interactions reveal different strengths and weaknesses. So it requires continual fine-tuning. So continue to be vigilant on those interactions. As you did now, look for ways to improve it and strengthen it. Secondly, recognize always that international tax, because of the businesses that are impacted and the complexity of those businesses, what works in one area for one business may well work the opposite in the other. International tax requires a very thoughtful balance. Always look for balance. Correct, but don't overcorrect. Do the homework. Create a thoughtful solution. I think often can be bipartisan. That would be my recommendation.
I agree fully, Chairman. Thank you so much for your comments, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gomez, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Mr. Brady. I actually missed the times, even though I disagreed with Republicans on a lot of issues, when Republicans were Republicans. They had a theory of economics, and they believed it, and it was somewhat rational, and it had some rationality behind it. Here's an article from 2018, GOP Rep. Kevin Brady, tariffs are taxes that impede the nation's economic growth. Republican Rep. Kevin Brady is worried about the long-term impact President Trump's tariffs could have on economic growth. Tariffs are taxes, quote unquote, that impede economic growth. They pick winners and losers. We do worry about that. I'm assuming you still agree with that tariffs are taxes.
So
that's a simple yes or no.
So, Congressman, I will tell you my views are very well known.
I'm going to reclaim my time.
And we'd love to have that
conversation. Mr. Brady, I know you don't want to get in trouble or piss off some people out there, the president with speaking out of turn. But here's the thing. Tariffs are taxes. And that's what I want to talk about, how it's actually hurting the American people. We've seen it across the board. You're seeing prices increase across the board for families. Prices on groceries are up. You see car prices up. Housing costs are up. Up. And here's the thing, no matter what they say, and this is what I told even the Democrats last year, you might look at economic indicators and say things have improved. But if it's not improving in the pocketbooks of the American people, then you have a problem. If they're struggling to make ends meet, you have a problem. If you can't buy a car, you have a problem. And one of the statistics that we know that this quote-unquote investment in our country, this economic growth is not helping, is that fact that more Americans are defaulting on auto loans than ever before. These are working people that need their cars to get by. I was a person that worked minimum wage jobs, so I understand if you don't have a car to get to work, then your economic outlook is going to get worse. It's going to get worse. So one of the things I want to continue stressing is that every time we leave these tariffs in place, more people are going to suffer. As a dad of a toddler, cost of baby clothes and kids' clothes is up. Shoes made 99% outside the United States are up. And yesterday, how many of you agree that when Donald Trump said that affordability is a scam, How many of you guys agree with that? Raise your hand. I mean, he is your president. So this is my point. Like, growth is good, but as if it helps people. Does it raise people out of poverty? Does it actually give them an opportunity to buy a house? Does it give them an opportunity to start a small business? Does it give them an opportunity to send their kids to college? Do they have health care that's affordable? Mr. Brady, and you and I know that we can reach trade deals that are good for the American people. We did that with USMCA, 394 votes in the House of Representatives, 90 in the Senate. I'm saying that we need to get back to the common sense economics that help create real growth. And this is also about our democracy. More people now, I think almost 70-something%, believe that their kids are going to do worse than the last generation. Worse. That's not a healthy democracy when you think the system is fundamentally broken, when you think that you can't get ahead if you play by the rules. What they start believing is burn it down, burn the system down. And that's not just on the left, that's on the right as well. So when we let ACA subsidies expire, you see prices go up, that's a problem. So we're going to be pushing back because it's about how does it change the lives of people on the ground. When Trump had a chance to give $40 billion, only $20 billion it takes to extend the ACA subsidies, he took $40 billion and gave a bailout to Argentina. Then turned around, and Argentina then turned around and used it to cut a soybean deal with China. That's not America first. That's the working people last. And we need to get back to common sense policies. And we might disagree on the policies on how to do it sometimes, but at least the old Republicans had some rationality behind their policy making. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Miller, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly and Ranking Member Thompson, and thank all y'all for being here today and taking the time to testify. Under the guidance of President Trump, the United States has been a leader in global competitiveness, promoting pro-growth, pro-business, America First policies. The Working Families Tax Cuts strengthened and reinforced the successful policies from the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Specifically, the Working Families Act made permanent the 199A small business deduction and incorporated my bill, the Saving Gig Economy Taxpayers Act, which restores the 1099K reporting threshold to $20,000 and 200 transactions so that the gig workers aren't unfairly hassled by the IRS. The Working Families and Tax Cut Act also made permanent crucial international tax policies that have resulted in more domestic jobs and investment. Chairman Brady, you warm my heart. It's great to see you. Can you speak to how the TCJA and the Working Families Act international provisions helped promote domestic manufacturing industries, and how might we see these policies benefit everyday Americans?
Yeah, and I think good to see you, Congresswoman. Thanks for your leadership in so many areas of this committee. So I don't think there's any doubt that the actions that you've taken, both to lock in that competitive lower rate for corporations and businesses, is key. Fully restoring the three business provisions are extremely pro-growth, if not the most pro-growth in the bill, and key. But thirdly, I think the changes in the international area are not just needed, but vitally important. As you know, the international tax area is complex. The interactions reveal strengths and weaknesses. Congress has to pay continual attention to those provisions to continue to improve them. I don't think there's any question that the changes you made in Guilty Beat and FDII, for example, is going to create more reasons for U.S. companies to invest and build and grow here. The changes you made throughout international tax really creates incentives to locate IP here, make America that global hub, and build the manufacturing to allow you to sell and compete around the world from here in America. You made changes that punished, to your point, punished companies that were doing heavy investment manufacturing in the U.S. We want to reward that. Again, an inadvertent consequence of the interaction of all of these provisions. You're even seeing this now. The great work you did in R&D in this bill is being, handicapped by the interaction with the corporate alternative minimum tax in a negative way. Actually minimizes the incentives you're creating. And so I have no question that from TCJA, from the low unemployment rates, the low poverty rates, the higher real wage growth, a good part of that came because of the changes we made to become more competitive. And I'm convinced those same benefits to working families, and Main Street businesses will grow because of the improvements you made in the international tax arena.
Thank you so much. Professor Wells, in layman's terms, can you tell us one new policy change that you think we should consider that could reduce unnecessary burdens and reduce complexity in international tax?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I think that now that we have a robust global minimum tax on active foreign business income, I think there's an opportunity to rethink the scope of the Subpart F regime, which is a companion regime that duplicates that same area. So in my written testimony, I indicated that the U.S. Subpart F regime should be limited to ensure a normal corporate tax on the provision of goods and services into the U.S. economy from foreign affiliates. But after that, active business income earned in foreign jurisdictions should simply be subject to the global minimum tax of 951 Cap A, and there would be significant simplification if those historic legacy imported for the era foreign-based company sales income rules and foreign-based company services rules were pruned in light of the enactment that you've made with in 2017 and 2025 with Section 951 Cap A. The enactment of that provision calls into question and makes somewhat redundant the earlier provisions that were in place.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Ms. Van Dyne, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us here today. Throughout this year and last, this committee has met and deliberated for hours on end to deliver promises to the American people. And today's hearing gives us an opportunity to highlight those results that have actually worked and the momentum that we cannot afford to lose. Before the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, our tax code was actually pushing jobs, pushing research, and entire headquarters overseas. Corporate inversions were rampant, our tax base was eroding, and American workers were paying the price. The TCJA reversed that trend. It modernized our international tax system, it reduced incentives for base erosion, and most importantly, it made America a more attractive place to invest and innovate. This year, Congress has built on that success by passing the Working Families Tax Cuts Act. The tax package would strengthen and made permanent the international reforms that have been so central to American competitiveness. By establishing stable rates, we gave U.S. companies the long-term certainty that they needed to be able to invest here, to be able to hire here, and to be able to keep their innovative work in the United States. At the same time, we work closely with the Trump administration to ensure that the United States maintains its tax sovereignty in the face of the OECD's Pillar 2 and digital services taxes. And I appreciate Treasury's progress toward a side-by-side arrangement that protects American workers and prevents foreign governments from imposing their taxes on U.S. businesses. This has been a core priority for this committee, and we must stay vigilant. Chairman Brady, it's great to see you back.
Good to see you.
I look at this picture every time that I'm in here, and while I love this picture, I really do think that the one that was presented to you by the Texas delegation, I hope you have that proudly displayed and would prefer to have that sometimes in here.
Could we strike that from the record, Mr. Chairman?
Prior to 2017, we saw constant inversions, capital lockout, and an international tax system that simply wasn't competitive. Chairman Brady, you were instrumental in crafting the TCJA. Can you speak on how TCJA's international provisions actually helped to reverse those trends and bring investments back to the U.S.?
Yeah, so those inversions, those companies picking up and leaving or moving their headquarters or dragging along their manufacturing research out of our communities was the result of a outdated and uncompetitive international tax code. One from the Kennedy administration. In fact, our international tax provisions, if they were a person, were old enough to qualify for Medicare. And as a result, we were seeing that those activities in a very negative way. What we knew is if we could make the corporate rate competitive again at 21%, if we could move from a worldwide taxation system to more of a territorial system, if we could put in place, which we did, safeguards against companies either exporting their profits to low-tax countries or importing their deductions to artificially lower their taxes here, if we did all that and combined it with incentives for an investment in the U.S., innovation in the U.S., and make us competitive, we knew we could reverse the damaging effect of inversions, and that's exactly what we did. But I think the work that you've done here in the One Big Beautiful Bill builds on that and makes it even harder for companies to justify those inversion-type activities. I predict we won't see tax-driven inversions as a result, again, of TCJA and the work that this committee has done. That continues to be a positive development. But beyond that, the incentives and the fine-tuning, the improvements you made, again, takes this up a notch as far as our goal to make the U.S. the premier destination in the world for new investment, for IP, for jobs, for growth. All of this, you've built upon that. And as we're hearing from the industries of the future like AI, you know, they've made it very clear the work that you've done in building on this is going to, frankly, put the U.S. in the forefront of winning the innovation race. And as you know and as you've said, the country that wins the innovation race really wins the future. You just took, I think, a very important step to positioning America to do just that.
I appreciate that very much. You know, you may have heard of the National Association of Manufacturers report that failing to pass this year's tax package would have resulted in 6 million job losses, $540 billion in lost wages, and $1 trillion in lost GDP, or millions in lost jobs and significant reductions in wages and GDP. Why would these economic damages have been so significant, and what does that tell us about the importance of a certainty in our tax code?
Permanence matters. When you get the tax code right and policy right, permanence is the most pro-growth thing you can do, and you can see it because it's the opposite. On provisions that are good in policy but are temporary, you don't get bang for the buck because businesses can't see the certainty to make the long-term investments that really grow the economy in the U.S. locally. So I think the permanence that you insisted upon on this bill is going to continue to enhance the pro-growth provisions you've got in here.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Horsford, you were recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and to the ranking member. And it is an important discussion around international taxes and digital services specifically, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on those issues. Mr. Brady, it's good to see you. But unfortunately, you know, we also need to deal with the elephant in the room, per se. And so as many of my colleagues here today pat themselves on the back for showering multinational corporations with tax breaks, working people here in America and small businesses here in America are being hit with the largest tax increase in 32 years. Let's talk about some facts. The Trump tariffs are the largest U.S. tax increase as a percentage of GDP since 1993. According to the Tax Foundation, the Trump tariffs threaten to wipe out the very tax cuts that Republicans keep touting. And there's proof. Just this week, the Wall Street Journal reported that U.S. manufacturing has contracted for the 9th consecutive month. So who pays the price for these blanket tariffs? American consumers and American businesses. Let me repeat that. American consumers and American businesses are footing the bill and feeling the pain. And Mr. President, affordability is not a hoax. It is reality, and your policies are making life more expensive for Americans, not bringing down cost as you promised. So while Republicans praise themselves for helping the biggest corporations, let's remember that the average American household is paying an extra $1,700 this year because of these tariffs. That's $1,700 that could be used to pay groceries and rent or health care. Professor Clausing, my colleagues want to talk about competitiveness, so let's talk about how Donald Trump's chaotic tariffs are decimating Nevada's tourism economy. From January through September of this year, Las Vegas welcomed 2.5 million fewer visitors. Harry Reid International has seen a 6.4% year-over-year drop in total passengers and a 13.5% decline in international arrivals. And as Professor Alan Feldman of UNLV's International Gaming Institute put it, a lot of the state's economy is tied up in our tourism sector. Your testimony explains that these tariffs raise prices on intermediate goods, suppress demand, and weaken U.S. exports. In Nevada, where our economy is really entirely focused on hotels to restaurants to gaming, it depends on price-sensitive tourism and global supply chains. These shocks are pushing businesses to the brink. Would you agree that Trump's tariffs are directly harming Nevada's tourism economy and accelerating the financial distress we're seeing among small businesses and mid-sized businesses? Yes or no?
Absolutely agree.
Thank you. As you also know, businesses are scrambling because the Trump tariffs were imposed without congressional authority, something that I think all of us should be concerned about. And they've slammed every importer in America. Just this week, Costco, one of the largest retailers in the country, filed a lawsuit because they want their tariff money back if the Supreme Court rules these tariffs illegal. And frankly, they can afford to sue. But the small businesses in my district, the family-owned importer, the toy shops, the restaurant supply companies, they don't have legal departments. They don't have the cash to take the federal government to court. They just pay the tariff bill and swallow the cost. If this committee is serious about making U.S. businesses competitive, it must recognize that the ability to sue for tariff refunds can't be the dividing line between which businesses survive and which go bankrupt. That's why I'm working on legislation right now to ensure small businesses can receive tariff refunds automatically and quickly. If these tariffs are struck down, as we expect they will be, without having to hire a lawyer to take on the federal government. Professor, you've testified that these blanket tariffs raise costs and weaken America's global competitiveness. In Nevada, small and mid-sized businesses are absorbing those costs, potentially without any path to a tariff refund. So how does our system, where only the largest firms can protect their tariff refund rights, distort competition and undermine U.S. firms operating in international markets?
Thank you. Yes, the unleveled playing field is a very real phenomenon when it comes to tariff exemptions and the compliance costs associated with these tariffs. It's very hard to even figure out the rules, which are constantly changing, much more complicated than it used to be, and that's a higher share of cost for a small business than it would be for a very large one. And this is a more general problem in our tax code. If you look at the favorable regimes that we've provided for multinational companies, they get taxed at a much, much lower rate than domestic small businesses, which pay the full freight. So this is a systematic problem through which our tax code is encouraging market concentration.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
Mr. Moran, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to the witnesses. I want to thank you all for joining us here today to discuss the past, present, and our future successful international tax regime. Prior to the enactment of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the U.S. tax system was experiencing a fundamental lack of competitiveness due to America's last policies, in my opinion. These policies led to several detrimental economic trends that eroded the tax base. 3 specific ones come to my mind. First, companies frequently shifting income outside the U.S., leading to persistent base erosion. Second, tax-motivated corporate inversions. And third, capital lockout, where capital was trapped offshore and not being invested domestically. Congressional Republicans and President Trump saw these consequences and decided to put the bad policies to rest with the creation of FDII, GILTI, and BEAT combined with a 21% corporate income tax rate and enhanced business deductions. The trend of base erosion and corporate inversions is largely over. While these now permanent policies are leading the U.S. into a new age of economic growth, it's important that we continue to streamline these provisions without impacting tax liability. Chairman Brady, I want to focus on the base erosion and anti-abuse tax, also known as BEAT. Under your leadership, you brought on a successful package and the passage of the TCJA in 2017, and you have seen how BEAT prevents companies from shifting profits to lower tax jurisdictions. However, there are certain circumstances that subject companies to BEAT when they are in fact not engaging in wrongful profit shifting. For example, say a company acquires a certain intellectual property in an offshore jurisdiction and attempts to repatriate that IP to the U.S. The repatriation of that IP can often trigger BEAT liability, making it costly for well-intentioned companies to invest more in the U.S. when bringing this IP back would create good-paying jobs and expand the U.S. tax base. Chairman Brady, after TCJA and the Working Families Tax Cuts, do you think there are still ways where we can improve BEAT? And in what ways do you think it makes sense to modify BEAT to ensure we are not discouraging IP repatriation by U.S. companies?
Yeah, so first, thank you as a fellow Texan. Thanks for your leadership on the committee on international trade issues, including this. One, BEAT is working as we envisioned in the base erosion area. That combined with GILTI and the other safeguards, a new report from PwC shows that the multinational income on average for our corporations, when you, in 2022, the last full year we have, that tax revenue, when you include state and local to that, are averaging about 26%. In fact, every year since 2012, that average multinational tax is well above the 15% global minimum tax, so it's working. Can it be improved? Yes. It doesn't make sense. We now know it doesn't make sense to include taxes, income you're already paying taxes on in the U.S. When you're being taxed 30% in Germany, doesn't make sense to be punished there. And then there are what I would call the Congress-approved business tax credits. Seems to me you'd want to exempt those as well. One word of caution. I think there are good areas here. Tax code, international tax is complex. It has unforeseen impacts. As I mentioned earlier, do everything in balance. You know, correct but don't overcorrect. Catch what you need and no more. As you look at BEAT in other areas, be thoughtful, reach out to stakeholders, because I can guarantee you in this complex BEAT area, as others, there will be consequences for business, not because they're bad actors, just because that's how they're formed, that's where they sell, that's how they're taxed. And so I really think there can be more improvements in that area, and taking how you handle your legislative work anyway, which is to think through issues, welcome input, look for that balanced solution. I think that's exactly the right approach. I would encourage you to do it.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're currently writing a bill, and I agree with your answer completely. We're currently writing a bill that would encourage IP repatriation by adjusting the BEAT rules so that reasonably and prudently, so that U.S. companies can continue making robust investments in the American economy. Since 2017, congressional Republicans and President Trump enacted two major pieces of tax reform that have enhanced and done great things on the international stage. I think a little bit more needs to be done. We need to tweak as we're moving forward, and that's what we're working towards. While we champion the success of these policies, we're going to remain diligent and work prudently to continue to encourage repatriation of those IPs that are trapped overseas. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Davis, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kelly, for letting me wave on to this hearing. And I want to thank all of the witnesses. It's good to see you, Chairman Brady. It's always good to see you.
Good to see you, Doctor.
Thank you. Doctor, Clausen, it's good to see you again, too, and it's a delight. You know, as I listened to the hearing, I was thinking that for my constituents and for the nation, tariffs are the biggest tax increase we've seen in a generation. And just as you said, Professor Clausen, in your testimony, Trump tariffs are raising prices for Americans on a range of necessities and crippling businesses all over the place. I'm especially concerned about the well-being of vulnerable groups of Americans, such as foster youth, senior citizens, and others who have limited resources and who face challenges in responding to sudden price increases in essential goods. Professor, could you tell us, how do tariff-related price increases for food, housing, utilities, and prescription drugs affect vulnerable foster youth, seniors, and others who have limited income?
Thanks so much for that question. I think it's a very important one. Tariffs are particularly damaging for the lowest income Americans. One study finds that the burden as a share of income is 3 times higher for the lowest decile than it is for the highest decile. And one estimate is that the 2025 tariffs will put an additional 650,000 to 800,000 people below the poverty line because they will be taxed below that level by the higher prices. These higher prices are substantial. Estimates indicate textiles and clothing prices will rise by 14%, motor vehicle prices by 13%. This can amount to costs of thousands of dollars for U.S. households and particularly hurt those that are most vulnerable.
And let me ask things that sometimes we don't think about is how does this affect the cost of child care, for example, just simply child care?
Yeah, so any good that is becoming more expensive will impact the whole economy, and in childcare uses traded goods too. But there are a lot of other policies in play right now that are also increasing the cost of childcare. Utilities are becoming more expensive, due in part to the phasing out of the clean energy subsidies. Healthcare is becoming more expensive as the premium tax credits go away and as Medicaid is going to be cut. SNAP is being cut under this new OB3 bill, and labor is becoming more expensive due to these immigration crackdowns. And I think that those policies, the moral implications, I think, are particularly serious, but the labor force implications are serious as well. And when you take that whole portfolio of policies, it's all raising costs for childcare in addition to the tariffs.
You know, all that I've been hearing is that I'm trying to find out who benefits. We know that consumers don't. We know that producers, like farmers, who can't sell their crops or can't distribute what they've produced, all of these are losers. Who are the winners?
Yeah,
Who benefit?
That's a good question. I mean, I think partly tariffs are invitation for political corruption. And so at times, if one company can get an exemption when their competitors don't get an exemption, they may have an advantage in the marketplace. Or there might be certain sectors where the tariff provides temporary protection and they're able to, you know, sell a little bit more. But we find even that when you put tariffs on things like steel, right, that you might create an extra 1,000 jobs in the steel industry, but studies suggest that costs you tens of thousands of jobs in the industries that use steel. And I think one of the big costs that we haven't talked about here today, but is really important, is the cost to the international relations of the United States, too. We've alienated some of our closest trading partners, countries like Canada, Japan, Korea, Europe, that have stood by our sides and been great allies in all sorts of ways. And one of the reasons that Congressman Horsford sees less tourism in Nevada is because public sentiment in those countries is turning against the United States, in part because of this harmful trade war. So it's very hard to find winners, and I don't really see any.
Thank you very much. Thank you all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Doctor. I want to thank everybody for coming here today. I mean, I know you give up a day of your life and what you do every day, and you kind of walk away from that and make your way down here. Sometimes it's not a cheap trip. Thank you so much for being here today. The other thing I want to recognize right now, we have a staff behind us who does incredible work getting us ready for all of these hearings. And they're the unsung heroes on this. We kind of go by, yeah, fine, we all got that, and we get our moment of being on TV and talking about how great we are, but we don't talk about the people who do all the work. And I just want to let the staff know, on both sides, how much we appreciate the work that you do. So, thank you. So now, please be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal hearing record. With that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.